He needs to marry into vision, not textbooks. That's what Robert Langford said right before popping a cherry tomato into his mouth like he hadn't just humiliated me in front of 12 people, including my fiancée. A family brunch, technically, hosted at his estate, Langford Hall, as the plaque by the gate proudly announced, complete with peacocks roaming the back lawn and an imported marble fountain that hissed like it didn't belong in this century. I looked at Elise. She didn't say a word, didn't even blink, just stirred her coffee, eyes fixed on the cream swirling in lazy silence. The table went quiet. Even the cousin with the crypto startup shut up. You'd think a man who made his fortune in hydraulics would know the weight of pressure, but no. Robert Langford just kept going. She's got options. You understand that, Michael, don't you? This family didn't claw its way up the steel ladder just to watch its only daughter end up with a public employee who thinks wealth is measured in retirement benefits. He laughed gently, like he was commenting on the weather. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my untouched eggs, and said the only words I'd utter all morning. Thanks for the meal. Then I stood. No drama, no glass clinking, just silence and the soft scrape of my chair as I pushed it back. The butler, yes, they had a real butler named Gareth, opened the door for me like this happened often. Maybe it did. Funny thing, I wasn't even angry. Not then. I wasn't embarrassed either. I wasn't anything. Because to be wounded by something, you have to expect more. And after 3 years of smiling at Elise's father, of pretending not to notice the way he introduced me to business associates as a local educator, I'd already run out of illusions. I got in my car, drove home, and fed my cat. And somewhere around the second scoop of litter, it hit me. Not a revelation, but a reminder. The most dangerous man in the room isn't the one with the loudest voice. It's the one quietly taking notes. And I had been taking notes for a very, very long time. Hey, quick pause. Since you're already deep into this story, just a small request. More than 97% of you listen without subscribing, and that number matters. Subscribing helps us keep the team running, keeps the stories sharper, and shows us you're here for the long game. Appreciate it. Back to the story. Robert thought bloodline meant business, that inheritance meant insight, that a $5 million wine cellar somehow translated into legacy. What he never once asked, what no one at that pristine brunch table asked, was what I did with the rest of my time. Because yes, I taught history, specifically systems of collapse, empires, dynasties, monopolies, ideological regimes, what starts them, what fuels them, and most importantly, how they rot from the inside. And for the last 11 years, while Robert Langford was busy overpaying for lobbyists and buying golf club equity, I was spending every dollar Elise thought went to teachers' union dues on shadow positions, silent trusts, and investment advisories. Not out of malice, out of curiosity. Langford Engineering had been one of 6 companies I'd been watching, not because I wanted to own it, but because I knew it was fragile, top-heavy, full of cousins with vice president titles and 0 deliverables, a CEO who hadn't touched a financial model in 15 years, quarterly reports that started reading like yearbook dedications. But I waited. I always waited. Until now. Because brunch wasn't just a humiliation, it was a trigger. The final box ticked. Back home, I pulled out the folder marked La Theta. Inside, flowcharts, a compliance audit I'd commissioned through a shell firm, and a signed offer letter that gave me advisory rights over a shell fund that, unbeknownst to Robert, now controlled 14.3% of Langford Engineering's voting shares. 4 hours later, I sent a single encrypted message. Phase 2. Initiate. Not revenge, just strategy. The doormat they'd all ignored walked into his modest 2-bedroom house and didn't take off his shoes. I didn't pet the cat, didn't turn on music, didn't even look at the stack of graded quizzes on the kitchen table. Instead, I went straight to the safe under the floorboard, under the rug Elise used to complain about because it clashed with the walls, and pulled out the nondescript silver case. No fingerprints, no brand, no locks, just weight. The kind of weight that doesn't come from revenge fantasies but from preparation. Years of it. Inside a single device, not my usual laptop, not the one Elise had access to. This one ran cold, air-gapped, booted from a secure thumb drive with encrypted roots that never touched a single American node. You don't need to be a spy. You just need to care more than they think you do. 3 dashboards, 3 different browsers, 3 aliases. Alias 1, J.M. Cavendish. Portfolio showing 8.2 million. Diversified between mid-cap real estate trusts and Class B voting shares in Midwestern infrastructure firms. The quiet, slow-growth stuff. the kind that never makes headlines but always makes money. Alias 2, M. Dalton Holdings, 5.6 million across a network of small but influential venture partnerships, mostly advisory positions, non-disclosed by design. I never touched operational decisions, just voting protocols and restructuring oversight. Alias 3, Anonym Trust 52, and that one? That was the keystone. The fund that, through 2 nested shells and a Cayman Series LLC, had slowly been increasing ownership in Langford Engineering since 2021. Back then, Elise's father had made some bad bets, tried to pivot into defense logistics without understanding the procurement ecosystem, lost 2 government contracts, bled cash for 4 quarters. That's when one of his lesser-known minority investors started offering bridge capital. Silent. No board seat requested, no questions asked. That was me. I didn't want a board seat. I wanted leverage, and I got it, share by share, clause by clause. While Robert Langford gave TED-style speeches about legacy leadership, I was buying the walls around him. Now, almost 2 years later, the trust owned 28.7% of Langford Engineering, enough to call a vote. More than enough when paired with the swing vote I'd acquired via a merger proxy last quarter. Langford's empire didn't have a king, it had a creditor with a key. I opened the folder labeled Phase 2, dated exactly 1 year before that brunch. Inside, template resolutions. Language drafted by a former SEC compliance officer I retained discreetly. A cover letter referencing Clause 12.3, Langford's own internal policy on undisclosed conflicts of interest in executive appointments. And a prepared motion to initiate an emergency shareholder restructuring vote under Title 15, Section 305 of the company charter, all legal, all signed, all timed to go out Monday at 8 a.m. Eastern. People like Robert think dynasties are unshakable, that names protect them, but dynasties rot fastest from inside when no one checks for termites. And I'd been the termite, silently gnawing through oak. A few keystrokes later, the resolution was staged for delivery, through counsel, through proper channels, all trackable, all defendable. My hand hovered over the return key. I thought about Elise, her silence at that brunch, the way she stirred her coffee like she was waiting for someone to rescue me. And when no one did, she just kept stirring. I pressed enter, nothing flashy, just a confirmation. Scheduled. Then I stood, stretched my back, and poured myself a whiskey. Mid-shelf. Nothing too proud. Because this wasn't pride. This wasn't rage. It was just execution. The Langfords had spent decades building a kingdom. I had spent 11 years building the lever that moves it. Monday mornings at Langford Engineering usually began with ego and espresso. The boardroom was a cavern of glass and walnut, designed less for collaboration and more for intimidation. Long table, 14 chairs, a portrait of Robert Langford, seated, chin tilted just slightly upward, watching from the far end like some wartime general who accidentally inherited a defense firm. Today, though, something broke the routine. Not a voice, not a person, an envelope. It was already there on the table when Robert arrived, placed deliberately at his seat, white, legal-sized, the seal marked Confidential Legal Service, not unusual in a company of Langford's size, but the bold lettering beneath that wasn't routine. Urgent, restructure required. He frowned, sat down, sliced it open with the edge of his Mont Blanc pen, and started reading. It took him precisely 14 seconds to chuckle. "What the hell is this?" he said aloud, raising the pages for the others to see. "Some joker thinks he owns the place." No one laughed. The CFO leaned in, eyes narrowing. Legal counsel, Sandra Cho, who'd been there for 16 years and rarely looked surprised by anything, took the document from Robert's hand, her face hardening as she scanned the lower third of the second page. "Sir," she said slowly, this isn't a joke." He raised an eyebrow, still half smirking. "You've got to be kidding. Majority voting position acquired via proxy fund structure? That's not even real legal language. What, some Reddit trader thinks he's a hedge fund now?" Sandra didn't laugh. She didn't blink. She turned the document around and tapped the signature line at the bottom. One name, Michael W. Dalton. Robert blinked. No, he's a teacher. Elise's boyfriend, the little guy." Sandra cleared her throat. "Michael Dalton is, in fact, the registered controlling interest holder for the proxy trust known as Anonym Trust 52, which, as of last quarter's silent equity conversion, controls 52.8% of Langford Engineering's voting shares." Robert's mouth opened, then closed. The room went still. No shouting, just silence, thick like molasses in a cold room. "How?" he muttered. Sandra tapped again, flipping to the attached chart. The fund acquired incremental shares over the last 8 quarters through Shell Partners. There's a summary of legal compliance in here. Clean, discreet. He's used advisory proxies to avoid public reporting until this trigger. The COO, Ron Beers, finally spoke. Wait, you're saying this nobody owns the company? He's not a nobody, Sandra replied, eyes flicking toward Robert. Not anymore. Legally speaking, he has authority to initiate a restructure vote, replace board members, and even appoint interim leadership, pending approval. Robert's voice came back, but quieter now. This isn't possible. It's not just possible, Sandra said, her voice calm and lethal. It's already happened. The vote is scheduled for Thursday. The door opened, and in walked Michael. No entourage, no fanfare, just the same tweed jacket, the same quiet demeanor, and a thin manila folder in his left hand. Good morning, he said softly, like he was starting a class. Robert stood halfway, a flash of confusion mixed with rage crossing his face. What the hell is this stunt? No stunt, Michael said. He pulled out a printed copy of the same letter Robert had just read. Just structure. You built the walls. I mapped the exits. He placed the folder on the table. Everything in here is compliant, transparent, no hostile takeover, just a shareholder realignment. You're not even in business, Robert snapped. Michael gave a tight smile. No, I study it. His eyes scanned the room. And while you were flying to Dubai for photo ops, I was reading your quarterly filings, your board meeting minutes, your procurement missteps, your cousin Tim's discretionary fund violations. I studied. I listened. I didn't interrupt. A pause. And then I acted. No one spoke. The CFO leaned back, her expression unreadable. One director cleared his throat and looked at his phone. Another stared at Michael like he'd never seen him before, because none of them had. Not really. They saw Elise's quiet fiancé, the one who brought baked goods to picnics, the one who knew trivia about naval battles and quietly excused himself when the men started talking mergers. They never asked what he did after hours. And now the man they ignored had become the man they reported to. Robert called Elise 4 times before she finally picked up. She was at her office reviewing a client's portfolio, unaware her phone had been buzzing in her purse like it was on fire. The moment she answered, his voice came through like static on a bad line, tight, clipped, and furious. Did you know? Dad? She asked, confused. Know what? That thing in the boardroom today. Michael, you're Michael. He signed as the controlling shareholder. Is this a joke? Are you two running some kind of sick game on me? Elise went quiet. What are you talking about? He owns the company, Robert hissed. My company. He owns more than half the voting rights through some shadow trust. He walked into the boardroom this morning like he'd been waiting for it. Did you know? No, she whispered, blinking rapidly. I didn't even know he was interested in your company. Robert hung up. No goodbye, no parting shot, just silence. That night, Elise came home early. The house was quiet as always. Michael wasn't watching TV, wasn't on the porch, wasn't cooking. He was seated at the dining table with a glass of water, flipping through a legal brief like he was catching up on light reading. She stood in the doorway for a long moment staring at him. Not the man she thought she knew, but a stranger in familiar clothes. Why didn't you tell me? He didn't look up. Tell you what? That you're this. He closed the folder gently, set it aside, and folded his hands. What exactly am I? A teacher, she said, almost choking on the word. That's what you said when we met. A high school history teacher. You had coffee breath and chalk on your jacket. You told me you didn't care about money. I don't, he replied. I care about leverage. She stepped forward, crossing her arms. So what? Was I just a Langford trophy to you? A stepping stone? Michael finally looked up, calm, precise. No, you were the one person in that family who never treated me like furniture, but I also knew you didn't want to know what I did after hours. You never asked, and I didn't offer. She blinked, stunned. You made me believe you were small. No, he said. You believed it. I never said that. She hesitated. You left for work at 7 a.m. You graded papers on weekends. You bought cereal with coupons. Michael stood and walked over to the bookshelf in the corner, pulled down a slim black binder and placed it on the table between them. He opened it slowly. Inside, page after page, financial statements, corporate filings, ownership records, a timeline of equity positions accumulated over 11 years, LLCs, trusts, offshore vehicles, layers of paper so clean they'd pass a forensic audit twice over, and on the final page, Langford Engineering, A pie chart, 51.2% of voting rights, dated, notarized, verified. Elise covered her mouth with her hand. Every position I've held, he said, tapping the spine. Every deal I've been part of, every single piece is in there. You lived beside me like none of this mattered, she whispered. I taught by day, he said, invested by night. While you slept, I was building something I never intended to use, until your father gave me a reason. She lowered her hand. And you didn't think to mention it? I did, he said softly, many times. But every time I brought up my side work, you smiled and said, that's cute. Like I was playing stock market make-believe. You never asked again. Her knees buckled slightly. She pulled out a chair and sat, staring at the open binder like it was some ancient text she'd never learned to read. You knew my father would react like that, she said eventually. Did you go to that brunch just to humiliate him? Michael tilted his head. No, I went to let him choose. He could have met me halfway, could have asked me who I was, what I built. Instead, he mocked me in front of his staff, his friends, his grandchildren. So no, I didn't go to humiliate him. I let him humiliate himself. She looked at him now with something between awe and fear. The man she lived with had disappeared, and in his place stood someone who'd quietly built an empire under her feet, one spreadsheet at a time. I don't know who you are, she whispered. Michael sat back down. That's the tragedy, Elise. You never tried to. By 8:47 a.m., Robert Langford was already sweating into the collar of his custom-tailored dress shirt. Not from the heat. Langford Engineering's boardroom kept a consistent 68 degrees year-round, but from something far less manageable, the quiet unraveling of assumed loyalty. He'd summoned the meeting himself. Emergency financial strategy session, the email read. High priority, mandatory attendance, no agenda attached, because the agenda was simple. Rally the old guard, remind them who built the company, put this ridiculous shareholder confusion to rest. He walked in fast, commanding, expecting the usual, half smiles, seat shuffles, and soft applause. Instead, no one stood, no one smiled. The boardroom was oddly still. 12 members, 12 tight expressions, some unreadable, others already betraying a shift. And then CFO Renee Baxter stood, calm, measured, not deferential. She placed a slim folder on the table and cleared her throat. Before we begin, I'd like to address last quarter's capital ledger. There's a misunderstanding I'd like to correct. Robert, still standing, tried to interject. Renee, we don't need... She kept speaking. Without the structured liquidity from Ms. Dalton Holdings, we would not have made Q3 payroll. The capital injection was private, silent, and processed through standard contractual channels. Clean, compliant, and critical. Robert blinked. Excuse me? The company was $4.7 million short, she said, flipping the folder open. We'd already deferred bonuses. The bridge loan covered the gap. Mr. Dalton refused board credit or naming rights. He only asked for voting recognition in accordance with his share class. Silence. Even the director of operations, who'd been in Robert's pocket for years, kept his eyes on the paper. Robert turned to Sandra, the legal counsel. You knew about this? Sandra nodded. I reviewed the terms. Everything was above board. The trust filed all necessary disclosures through Delaware and was cleared by internal audit. Robert finally sat down, not from decision, just from gravity. The chair didn't feel like it used to. It felt borrowed. And then the door opened. Michael walked in. No briefcase, no laptop, just a notepad and a ballpoint pen. He moved calmly to the head of the table, the chair Robert had always reserved for himself, and pulled it out. No one stopped him. No one said a word. He sat, looked around the room, and spoke with a quiet authority that filled every inch of glass and walnut. Langford Engineering will no longer be run as a country club inheritance project. No anger, no bravado, just a clean surgical incision. The air thickened. A few board members nodded, small, almost imperceptible gestures, but unmistakable in weight. Robert leaned forward, fingers steepled. What exactly are you proposing, Michael? Michael didn't even flinch. I'm not proposing. I'm initiating. A pause. Then he turned over his notepad, revealing a printed chart. Not colorful, not designed for show, just numbers, departments, dates. Operational streamlining begins next quarter. We're cutting legacy hires by 40%, introducing performance-based reviews for all C-suite positions, consolidating R&D and divesting from non-core verticals. Oh, and your nephew Brandon's department? It hasn't posted a net profit in 6 quarters. That's done. Robert's voice cracked. You think you can just walk in here and... Yes, Michael said. Because I didn't walk in. I bought in. While you were looking for heirs, I was building leverage. He stood and placed a single page in front of each board member. It wasn't a proposal. It was a schedule, implementation, review, sign-off. No room for debate, just an open path forward. Robert looked around the room, searched for an ally, a familiar glance, a nod. None came. Even Renee Baxter wouldn't meet his eyes now. His empire hadn't been stolen. It had been reorganized. The meeting adjourned without vote, without argument, just quiet exits one by one as board members accepted what Robert never imagined possible. Power doesn't reside in lineage, it resides in preparation. And Robert Langford had just learned, too late, that legacy doesn't entitle you to a seat when the architect of your undoing already has the deed. Robert Langford never believed in walls, he believed in gates. Controlled access, key holders, invitations, everything in his world was built around who was let in and who was left out. And for 3 decades, he'd held the master key to every room. But walls don't need doors when they close in. And Michael hadn't knocked. He'd just slowly, patiently bricked the place up from inside. The first sign came 2 days after the boardroom meeting. An email from compliance. Short, terse, marked internal, urgent review. Robert read the subject line twice before opening it. Clause 12.3 Violation Report, Pending Disclosures. He scanned the attached summary. Then again, slower. Clause 12.3 Conflicts of Interest. Family-based appointments and employment. Passed unanimously, 1997. No direct blood relation of any executive or board member may hold a salaried position without documented third-party evaluation and performance-based justification in accordance with federal conflict of interest standards for government-contracted entities. Robert had forgotten Clause 12.3 even existed. It had been a feel-good amendment, created in response to a whistleblower complaint back when the company first applied for defense contracts. A box-checking move, something legal tossed in to smooth over a procurement snag. No one enforced it, not in 26 years, but someone had just flagged it, someone who now had authority to apply it. Michael. The report continued. Marcus Langford, VP of Expansion. Nephew, no third-party review on file. Brian Langford, Director, Outreach. Nephew, role created post-appointment. Charles Dunmore, Head of Compliance. Cousin, Conflict of Position and Oversight. Elise Langford, Director of Partnerships. Daughter, appointed during relationship with board member Dalton. Each name a nail. Each violation, a hammer. Robert forwarded the email to Sandra Cho with one line. Fix this. She replied 7 minutes later. We can't. The clause is active. Any exceptions would invalidate current federal contracts. DoD compliance team is already reviewing the flagged hires. We have 14 days to issue resignations or forfeit procurement eligibility. He called her, demanded an emergency in person. Sandra met him in his office with a printed copy of the clause. I wrote this, she said flatly. You insisted on the language. You said it would protect us from internal scandal. That was before, he snapped. Before what? She asked. Before your nephew started showing up to work in Lambo hoodies with no deliverables? Or before your daughter skipped 3 consecutive partner reviews? He slammed the desk. I'm the founder. You're the founder, she said calmly, with a direct conflict of interest. That was fine before we had oversight. But now? You've got federal audits and Michael Dalton sitting in the seat across from procurement. This isn't about family. It's about exposure. Robert tried the next lever. He called Michael, voice low, measured, a slight tremble beneath the polish. I understand your position, he began, but we can work this out, quietly, internal transfers, reassignments. We don't need to burn the whole house down. Michael's voice on the other end was calm, steady, but not cold. This isn't personal, Robert. It's procedural. You don't have to do this, Robert whispered. Michael paused. I'm not doing anything. I'm enforcing what you wrote. That was the moment Robert realized, fully, fatally, that the rules he once used to keep others out were now being turned against him with surgical precision. Clause 12.3 wasn't a sword Michael forged. It was a relic Robert had forgotten to bury. 3 days later, 4 resignation letters were submitted. 2 nephews vanished from the directory overnight. Elise's title was restructured. She remained, barely, but her role was slashed, stripped of leadership, her salary reduced to match performance metrics she'd never met. And Robert? He was left alone in the office he built, surrounded by portraits of family he could no longer employ, realizing that the fortress he spent decades building had no escape tunnel. Because the real trap wasn't Michael's. It was his own signature on the clause that sealed the walls. The Langfords never missed their own galas. They didn't host parties, they hosted statements, the kind with crystal goblets, imported orchids, and a donor list so long it had to be printed in landscape orientation. This year's gala was no different. Held at the Langford Foundation's private event hall, the theme was Legacy Through Innovation, a contradiction only the obscenely rich could say with a straight face. Elise arrived alone, no Michael at her side, no husband slipping his hand to the small of her back, just her in a navy silk dress that hugged her reputation but didn't protect her from the stares. The murmurs had already begun before she stepped past the first champagne tray. Isn't he the guy who thought she married a teacher? Apparently he owns half the company now. More than half. Where is he tonight? She smiled when asked, said he had a prior engagement, said it casually like she hadn't spent the last 3 hours rehearsing answers in the mirror. Her father kept a grim face the entire evening, shaking hands like he was still on a throne, ignoring the cameras that lingered a bit too long. They toasted. They speechified. Elise sat at the long table with the rest of the family, smiling on cue, clinking glasses with donors who'd stopped calling her Langford's daughter and had started calling her the one married to the new guy. Across town, Michael was not at home. He was seated at a round table under soft lights at the New Horizon Policy Forum, a think tank dinner so exclusive even most senators didn't get invited. Tonight's panel was hosted by a former Treasury Undersecretary, a senator from Massachusetts, the CEO of a rising defense logistics firm, and Michael W. Dalton, the quiet investor behind 3 of last year's most profitable company restructures. They all wore name tags. Michael's read simply, M. Dalton, Capital Advisor. Someone took a photo during the panel discussion. Michael wasn't speaking, he was listening. Chin tilted slightly, one hand resting on the table, a pen in the other. The senator next to him was laughing at something he'd just said. That photo ran the next morning in Capital Trends Weekly, nestled between 2 financial exposés and a profile of a rising biotech mogul. The caption read, "The quiet investor behind 3 turnarounds." Michael Dalton joins policy leaders to discuss the future of private equity and federal infrastructure partnerships. Elise saw the article before she even left the gala. Someone had left a printed copy on a side table, next to the donor brochures and the vanity press coverage of Langford Engineering's early years. There he was, her husband, her teacher husband, sitting between power and policy like he'd belonged there the whole time. She stared at the image for a full minute before folding the paper quietly and slipping it into her clutch. Robert saw it too. Someone forwarded it to him mid-speech. His phone buzzed, he glanced down, froze. His toast wavered halfway through a sentence. The words family strength stumbled off his tongue like wet gravel. He recovered, barely, but the optics didn't. Because everyone had seen it by then, the man he'd publicly mocked, discarded, laughed at over steak and port, was now dining with people who could call hearings, shift markets, and fund entire campaigns. And Robert? He was still hosting parties for people who barely RSVP'd anymore. The difference wasn't just money, it was relevance. Michael wasn't trying to join their world. He'd outgrown it, silently, effortlessly, and now the only thing louder than his absence was the respect that followed it. It was a Thursday afternoon when Elise called. No pretense this time, no schedule check, no small talk, just silence on the line after he picked up, followed by a quiet, broken, "Can we talk?" They met at the Langford estate, neutral ground technically, though there was nothing neutral about it. Every room had been designed to intimidate, from the 2-story foyer with the chandelier made of Murano glass to the gallery hallway lined with oil paintings of men who'd all made their money before women were legally allowed to sign contracts. Michael parked at the side, not in the front loop. She was already waiting in the conservatory, sunlight cutting sharp lines across her face. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a navy sweater and jeans, an outfit so deliberately plain it almost made him laugh. Almost. "I didn't know," she said before he sat down. Her voice was hoarse. "About the voting shares, the trusts, any of it. You could have told me." Michael didn't move for a beat. Then, "I tried." She flinched, just slightly. "I brought up capital planning. You called it your cute hobby. I showed you a filing once. You scrolled past it and asked if we had milk. Elise, you weren't listening. You didn't want to." Tears welled, but they didn't fall. Not yet. "I thought we were building something," she whispered. "We were," he said. "You just didn't know the blueprint." She reached across the table, grasping for something. "I just want to understand. Maybe we can—" Footsteps interrupted her. polished loafers on marble. Robert Langford entered the conservatory without knocking, as if the room still belonged to him, as if Michael were the guest, not the majority shareholder who had already rearranged the board and reorganized the leadership structure he built with handshakes and blood ties. He didn't sit. "Are you proud of this?" he said. "You've embarrassed my family." Michael stood slowly, not angry, not defensive, just done. "I embarrassed your family?" he repeated. "No, you did that when you mocked me for loving your daughter, when you turned every dinner into a measuring contest I never signed up for, when you decided that who I was wasn't enough, not because of my character, but because of my title." Robert opened his mouth to fire back, but Michael raised a hand. "No more lectures, no more warnings. This meeting isn't about restoration, it's closure." He looked at Elise. "I came because you asked, not because I needed to." Then he walked out. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. He left the Langford estate for the last time, passing the fountain, the manicured hedges, the iron gate with the family crest etched into its spine, the same gate that once kept people like him out. By the time he reached his car, Elise was still seated, still staring at the empty space he'd occupied. Robert stood beside her, arms crossed, fury draining into something more fragile, something like fear, because the next day, the Langford Family Trust was flagged by auditors, not by Michael, but by regulatory requirement. Langford Engineering's new executive structure had triggered an automatic review. All financial connections between the company and its founding family were now under scrutiny. Robert received the notice in an unmarked envelope. Inside, a formal request for disclosure of all trust-linked payouts, distributions, and asset shifts from the last 7 years. Failure to comply, federal inquiry. Elise saw the envelope too, saw her father pale as he read it, and for the first time she understood. This wasn't war, it wasn't revenge, it was subtraction. Michael wasn't trying to take anything from them, he was just removing himself from the lineage, the table, the equation, and what collapsed afterward was never his to protect. Monday, 6:02 a.m. The Langford estate was still quiet when Robert padded downstairs in his robe, clutching his phone, half hoping the overnight markets had given him some kind of win, a signal that the world, somewhere, still ran on his timing. The front gate buzzed. A courier van, not the usual brand, no logo, just a man in a gray cap who handed the envelope through the bars with a clipboard and left without a word. He opened it at the kitchen counter with one hand while the espresso machine hissed to life behind him. One page, thick stock, plain serif type, no seal, no decoration. It read, "Langford Engineering Office of the Majority Shareholder, to Robert T. Langford, Executive Realignment Protocol Activation, to preserve client contracts and funding sources, and in accordance with compliance obligations filed with the Department of Defense and the U.S. Energy Commission, Langford Engineering will undergo executive restructuring, effective immediately. This action does not require your consent. Michael W. Dalton, Majority Shareholder, Chair of Restructure Oversight." Robert didn't finish the letter. He didn't need to. His hand loosened, and the page drifted to the tile floor beside his Italian leather slippers. His gaze didn't follow it. His eyes were fixed on nothing, stuck somewhere between disbelief and something colder, recognition. Because this wasn't a threat, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a change of title, one he'd never imagined could apply to him, former, not because he sold the company, not because he retired, but because someone simply outmaneuvered him. He staggered to the sink and gripped the edge. The marble felt colder than usual, or maybe his hands were just shaking now. Upstairs, Elise stirred. He heard the faint creak of her bedroom floorboards. Not their shared room, her room. Since the last meeting with Michael, she'd been moving through the house like a guest, like she wasn't sure whose name was carved into the foundation anymore. Because even she knew, Michael didn't pull the company out from under them. They had offered it up, slowly, ignorantly, piece by piece. In every quarterly meeting they didn't read, in every cousin they installed without merit, in every contract they assumed would be renewed just because the Langford name was on the letterhead. It wasn't theft, it was a vacuum, and Michael just filled the space they left behind. At 8:17 a.m., Robert called Sandra Cho. She picked up on the first ring. "Did you see the letter?" he asked. "I did." "What are our options?" She paused. Too long. "There are no options. It's compliant, Robert. He followed every protocol. We signed the charter. He owns the votes. The restructure committee is legitimate." "But it's my company," he snapped. No, she said, her voice dry. It was. He hung up. The espresso had gone cold. He poured it down the sink, watched it swirl into nothing, then turned to stare out the window. The landscapers were arriving, right on time. Same crew as always, men in bright vests trimming hedges around a home that bore his name. A name that, as of this morning, meant nothing on paper. That was the final insult. Michael hadn't shouted, hadn't stormed the gates, hadn't gloated. He'd simply slid a document across the table, followed every rule, honored every clause, gave Robert the dignity of his own systems, and used those systems to remove him, not with fury, with finality. The lecture hall was filled to capacity, rows of sharp young faces, notebooks open, phones recording, whispers buzzing with anticipation. The banner behind the podium read, Legacy versus Leadership, Power in the Modern Age. Guest lecture by Michael W. Dalton. He didn't wear a tie, no suit, just a gray blazer, open-collar shirt, and the calmness of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The moderator introduced him with a nervous smile. Mr. Dalton has advised 3 federal agencies, led multiple corporate turnarounds, and holds majority positions in 6 active enterprises. He's here today to talk about the myths of inheritance and the truth behind modern influence. Michael stepped forward. The applause was polite, but curious. He leaned into the mic and with no notes, no script, began. Legacy, he said, is a story people tell themselves to justify ownership. But leadership, that's earned, not inherited. He paced slowly, letting the silence speak louder than his voice. My father delivered mail in the snow for 30 years. My mother cleaned executive bathrooms at a building she wasn't allowed to enter through the front door. No college, no safety net, just work. Students leaned forward. Some recorded, some stopped typing and just listened. I spent 11 years watching men in suits speak about vision while they handed their empires to people who couldn't spell EBT. They didn't build successors. They bred entitlement. He paused, then smiled lightly. I studied those men. A hand went up from the middle row. A young man, nervous but eager. But don't you think bloodline still matters in business? I mean, if someone's family built something, shouldn't that carry weight? Michael tilted his head. Let me tell you a secret. He looked out across the crowd. My father was a mailman. My mother cleaned houses. I didn't inherit a thing. No legacy, no head start. Then his tone shifted, warmer, deadlier. But I studied the men who thought they were kings. I watched them confuse luck for brilliance, watched them build cathedrals with rotting foundations. He paused. And now, he smiled. Their kingdoms signed my checks. The room fell still, no applause yet, just stunned silence. Then suddenly, thunderous clapping, students standing, cameras flashing, professors nodding to each other like they'd just witnessed the first honest lecture of the year. Michael gave a single nod, stepped back, and walked off stage. Not triumphant, just finished. Across the city, the Langford Engineering boardroom sat quieter than usual. An empty chair remained at the head of the table. Robert had refused to fill it. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew why. The board still met. The company still functioned. Contracts were better than ever. Efficiency reports were up. Morale had stabilized. And yet the absence was louder than the man ever was. Robert sat beside the empty chair that morning, hands folded in his lap. He didn't speak during the meeting, didn't offer opinions, just sat. Elise sat beside him, hair tied back, a legal pad on her lap she didn't write on. On the far wall, a television played the financial news cycle on mute. They were covering the university symposium, footage of Michael speaking, subtitles running beneath the video. Their kingdoms signed my checks. Robert stared at it, unmoving. Elise glanced sideways at him, her voice barely audible. You told me he was just a teacher. No answer. His jaw flexed, once, then still, because there was no answer, only silence, and the truth that had come to sit in that empty chair. The man they mocked, dismissed, minimized, he hadn't just rewritten the story, he had restructured the family out of it, and now, there was no Langford legacy, only a line in the annual report, majority shareholder, Michael W. Dalton.